Hi Casibang's crew. Today we are going to start Unit 2. Unit 2 is cognition, which includes memory, thinking, problem solving, and intelligence. So it's a pretty big unit. Today, with today's video, we are going to start talking about memory. So first we're going to start our conversation with memory with our actual definition, our textbook definition. Really super simple. The persistence of learning over time. That is all that memory is defined as, the persistence of learning over time. We will also talk about memory in terms of parallel processing. So you all know what parallel lines are. So if you think of parallel lines, we are talking about a dual track or simultaneous processing. We process a lot of bits of information into our memory all at the same time without even realizing that we're doing it. And as we talk about memory and how we gain our memories and how we're able to retrieve them and store them, we'll refer back to this parallel processing. So the first thing to know about memory is this information processing model. And this is the big thing that we are going to focus on when we're talking about memory here. So the first part of the information processing model is encoding. So how we get the information into our brains. Next is storage. So how do we keep it there? And then the last part is retrieval. How do we get it out when we need to get it out? So here is some information that we will be talking about in this video and in the next video. So encoding, again, how do we get the information into our brain? We are going to talk about the Atkinson and Shiffrin model of memory. We're going to talk about effortful versus automatic processing. We're going to talk about the capacity of our memory, and we'll talk about some strategies for encoding the information permanently into our brains. When we talk about storage, we're going to talk about how do we retain this information. So we'll talk about a couple of different memory systems, explicit and implicit. We'll talk about emotional memory. We'll talk about long-term potentiation. And then we'll talk about our two memory systems. And then finally, with retrieval, how do we get this information back out of our brains? So we'll talk about the difference between recall, recognition, and relearning. We'll talk about retrieval cues, we'll talk about what happens when you forget, and we'll talk about memory construction errors. It's a lot of information. So memory will be broken down into two videos. We're not going to do it all in one video. So let's start with encoding. The first thing we want to look at is working memory. So this is a relatively new term in the study of cognition. And what we mean by working memory is this very active process. When we think about work, we think about the fact that we are doing something. So that's why it has to be an active process. So how do we process all of this information that's coming at us at one time? What we're hearing, what we're seeing, what we're smelling, what we're feeling, okay? All of those things are coming into our brains and trying to be processed all at the same time. And then once we process all that information, how do we retrieve it from our long-term memory? LTM, you'll see that abbreviation quite often. That is long-term memory. So when we talk about our working memory, we're talking about this active process that we go through to get the information into our brain, to store it, and then be able to retrieve it from our brains. So first process we need to talk about is encoding. So Atkinson and Shiffrin, two very prominent psychologists, developed this three-stage model of encoding. The first stage is our sensory memory. So anything that we record that starts with our senses, okay? Any of our five senses, hearing, smell, touch, taste. I'm missing one. Sight. How could I forget sight? That's the most important one. The second stage is short-term memory, so the very brief storage, and then long-term memory, which is permanent and limitless. Important for you to remember that. Long-term memory is permanent storage, and it's limitless. We can put millions of different bits of information into our long-term memory, and we're still going to hold on to it. So that first stage of encoding, our sensory memory. Here's a little quiz, a little activity for you. So on the next slide, you're going to see a series of letters for just 1 second. I want you to remember as many of them as you can. Okay, write it down. Okay, what letters do you remember seeing? Write it down on a piece of paper in your notes. All right, so now check yourself. Okay, check yourself. How well did you do? Okay, that was 1 second that your senses were bombarded with information, and there may have been other stuff going on around you as well. But how many of them did you remember? So our sensory memory is there for 3 primary reasons. The first one is it prevents us from being overwhelmed. So like I said, you're taking in information from all of your 5 senses right now. Every second of every minute of every day, you are taking in information from all of your 5 senses. So if you think about the sheer volume of information that we would have to process in any given second, you can understand how overwhelming this might be. So our sensory memory picks and chooses for us what we're going to pay attention to and what we're not going to pay attention to. So that's our second main purpose. It gives us decision time. Should I pay attention to what Casibang is telling me right now, or should I not? Or should I pay attention to what my feet are touching? Okay, or what my hands are touching, or what I might be smelling if I'm smelling dinner being cooked right now at home. It also allows for continuity and stability in your environment. So if we had to stop and pay attention to every single little thing that was bombarding us at any given moment, everything would be so disjointed. We would stop for a second and pay attention to what we see, and then what we hear pulls our attention away, and then what we're feeling pulls our attention away. So it gives us this ability to ignore some things and focus on what we really want to focus on. So for example, you guys are focusing on this video right now. So it allows for that sort of continuity, the continuous information and the stability of our information so that we don't get pulled in too many different directions at once. There are 2 types of sensory memory. Iconic. So if you think of an icon, okay, so these are going to be another set of confusing pairs. We talked about confusing pairs already. So these 2 here are going to be a set of confusing pairs. So I'm going to give you a little mnemonic device to help you remember. So iconic has that word icon in it. So if you think of an icon on your phone or on your desktop, that's what you're thinking of. So icon or iconic is your visual sensory memory. So the capacity for your iconic memory is everything that you can see at one time. Everything that you can see at one time. The duration, just a couple tenths of a second. The next thing that you see is going to push that image right out of your brain. There are a very, very small select group of people that have what is known as eidetic imagery, or otherwise known to you guys as photographic memory. Very, very small percentage of people. It is a rare ability. These people can access their visual memory for 30 seconds or more. So if you have what is known as a photographic memory, then you tend to remember everything that you've ever seen. The second type of sensory memory is echoic, and that's our auditory memory. So echoic, look at the word echo. Okay, so if you think of echo, we're going to echo things that we hear. So your capacity is limited to anything that can be heard at one moment, and it is actually smaller than the capacity of your iconic memory. This is why it is extremely difficult for people to sit in a classroom and just take notes based off of what a teacher is saying. And this is why it is extremely difficult to take notes that way. But the duration here lasts a little bit, just a little bit longer than our iconic memory. It's about 2 to 4 seconds. So I always say, have you ever been, sitting in your bedroom on your telephone or, doing homework or whatever, and your mom is talking to you and she's asking you to do something, and you realize that she's talking to you and you're like, "What, Mom?" And then as soon as you say what, you remember what she said. Okay? That's that echoic memory. And it's probably happened to you. It happens to just about everybody. You're not really paying attention, but it is in there and it is being processed. And if you can pay attention to it in that 2 to 4 second time period, it'll come back. And you can be like, oh yeah, Mom, I'll do the dishes. I heard you. Okay. Next, on the Atkinson and Chiffron model is our short-term memory storage, and that's always abbreviated to STM. And these are a couple of abbreviations that you should know because they may show up on a test or something. So our short-term memory gives us that ability to focus on only one thing at a time. It's that concept of selective attention. So we're going to focus on only one stimulus out of everything that's being bombarded at us at one time. So the capacity of our short-term memory is it's the magic number 7 plus or minus 2. So what this means is that without working, without trying, without using any memory tools, we can remember 7 bits of information at any given time. And the duration of our short-term memory is only about 12 to 30 seconds, unless you do something to rehearse it. So for example, when you meet someone new at a party and you really want to remember their name, you might be in your head just repeating their name over and over and over and over again. That's rehearsal. And that'll make sure that that memory goes from our short-term memory into our long-term memory. If you don't do that, it's likely to just kind of go away. Short-term memory is susceptible to interference. So for example, if you are counting, if you have a job in retail or in a restaurant and you're counting money and someone interrupts you, you forget where you're at and you've got to start all over again. Okay, so it is really susceptible to being interfered with. So that magic number 7 plus or minus 2. So this just kind of gives you a list of some of our magic 7s. If you ever wondered why do things come in 7s oftentimes, we like to say it's because that's all our short-term memory can hold. But things like the 7 wonders of the world, the 7 seas, the 7 deadly sins, 7 primary colors, 7 musical notes if you're into music, and 7 days of the week. And then our long-term memory. So our long-term memory is, like I said, limitless and permanent. So we are always going to retain all of our long-term memories. It's just a matter of, can we get them back out again? And we'll talk about that when we talk about retrieval. But the first part of our long-term memory are what is known as procedural memories. They're also called non-declarative memories. So you will want to know both of those terms. But these are memories for how things are done. So if you've ever heard, once you know how to ride a bike, you'll never forget how to ride a bike, okay? Those are things like procedural memories. Think about you brushed your teeth this morning. Those are procedural memories. You don't have to sit there and think, okay, I have to pick up my toothbrush. And now I gently place a strip of toothpaste on my toothbrush. And now I stick it in my mouth. You don't really think about all of that. You just do it. That's because you've been doing it for so long. It is a procedural memory. So things that we don't have to think about anymore. So habits, memories for how things are done, motor and cognitive skills. You guys don't think about how to walk. You don't think about how to walk up a set of stairs. You don't think about how you have to take notes or how you read. So those are all things that are procedural or non-declarative memories for us. They're also called implicit memories. And implicit memories are memories that are specifically not brought into consciousness. So when I say you don't have to think about how you're doing this, that's what we mean by it's not easily brought into consciousness. You don't have to think about doing it. The second set of long-term memories are declarative memories, also known as explicit memories. So these are things that you have either learned, okay? So semantic memory, these are things that you've learned, for example, in a classroom, how grammar works, how language works, words that you know the meanings for. and any information that you've gained in your formal education. And then episodic memories are memories of episodes, okay? Episodic, think episodes, okay? Episodes in your own life. So these are memories that are not available to everyone. Your 6th birthday party, or that Christmas that you got the coolest toy that you were hoping for. Those are episodic memories. Those are episodes in your particular life that you remember. So how do we encode all of this information? Okay, so we talked about some of the different types of memories, but how do they get there? How do we encode them? So automatic processing. Automatic, exactly what it means, okay? It happens automatically. We don't really have to think about it too often. And these are our implicit memories. So we encode information about time. If I asked you to tell me all about your day yesterday, from the time that you woke up to the time you went to bed, you would be able to give me a rough idea on the sequence of events that happened to you yesterday. You didn't think about, oh, Casibang's going to ask me about my day tomorrow. I better remember everything I've done. It just happens automatically. You encode information about space, so where information is located. So if you've ever taken a test and you're struggling on an answer and you're like, oh God, I can picture it perfectly where it is in my notes, I just can't think of the answer, that's encoding for space. And then frequency, how many times something happens. And again, it occurs without trying, and it can't be easily turned off. Okay, you can try and be like, I'm not going to remember the sequence of the events from yesterday, but it happens automatically. And again, it occurs without our awareness and without interfering with anything else that we are doing at that time. Okay, if we're learning something, if we're walking, if we're reading, whatever, it doesn't interfere with any of those abilities. The second type of processing is effortful processing. And again, here's a set of confusing pairs for you. Okay, automatic processing and effortful processing. Effortful processing is exactly what it sounds like. It takes effort to gain these memories. So these again are our explicit memories. So this is encoding that requires attention and conscious effort. Think school. Okay, anytime you have to remember any information for a test or a quiz or to do something in class the next day, this is effortful processing. So the amount that you remember depends on the amount of time you spend learning it. So this is why we like to give you homework, so that you can spend some additional time outside of the 49 minutes that we have you in class to remember this really important information. So overlearning, this concept of overlearning, personally, I don't think you can ever overlearn anything, but the continued rehearsal, so the continued repetition, the continued retrieval of this information, the continued using of this information helps to retain information. So what types of things do we encode? There's 3 different things that we encode. The first is visual encoding. So we're encoding for appearance. So for example, how many F's are in the following sentence? All right, so now if I asked you what that sentence said, you probably wouldn't be able to tell me because you weren't really reading the words. You were just looking for the F's. So that is that concept of visual encoding. We're just looking at the appearance of things. We're not really paying attention to the importance of it. The second type of encoding is semantic encoding, which is here where we're looking at the meaning. So for example, the procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange things into different groups. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. After the procedure is completed, one arranges the materials into different groups again. Then they can be put into their appropriate places. Eventually, they will be used once more, and the whole cycle will then have to be repeated. However, that is a part of life. So if I asked you to repeat this to me, would you be able to? Okay? Would you be able to? But now, if I told you what this passage was referring to, doing laundry, would you be able to repeat it to me now? Because now you understand the meaning behind the passage. So you would be more likely able to repeat it to me and remember it than you would the first way when you kind of had no idea what I was referring to. And then the third type is acoustic encoding, which again, acoustic is the sound of the words. So on this little chart, this shows you the better types of encoding. Okay, so semantic encoding is always going to be better. Okay, we're going to retain that memory longer. And then acoustic, okay, acoustic encoding. And then the last is visual encoding. Okay, not as good keep retaining those memories. So a couple strategies for encoding, and a few of these we've talked about already, right, the first couple days of school. So spacing effect, when we talked about the fact that you should space out your practice for like the week before you have an exam, do a little bit on each day, spacing effect. Massed practice is that cramming. Okay, we say not to really do that. It's not really super effective. The distributed practice, again, take time and do, 20 minutes a day, the 5 or 6 days up to the test instead of doing it all at once, the massed practice. And then the testing effect, the act of testing your memory. This is why I always give you guys practice tests, practice questions to keep strengthening your memory the more that you encounter these types of questions. Try remembering the string of letters. So here's another strategy that you can use to help you with that string of letters. Chunking, okay? Now try chunking the string of letters and see if your memory is better. So chunking is putting things into small groups. So again, if you look at our letters here, we have the letter X, and then we have IBM, CIA, FBI, CBS, MTV. Okay, so all things that you have probably heard of before. So it's probably a little bit easier for you to remember that string of letters than when you were just trying to remember the letters all on their own. So organizing pieces of information into smaller numbers of meaningful units. Maintenance rehearsal. We talked a little bit about this already. So information is repeated or reviewed to keep it from fading while in your working memory. So these are things like repeating someone's name in your memory, or repeating someone's phone number, or repeating to remember you have a vocab quiz tomorrow, or doing your vocab flashcards over and over and over again. Okay, those are all maintenance rehearsal. Mnemonic devices. I've already given you a few mnemonic devices already this year, and I will continue to do this, and sometimes I'll ask you to make them on your own. Okay, last couple ones, the self-reference effect, and we talked a little bit about this in the study skills as well. So remembering ideas and events as they relate to ourselves. We love being able to remember things that have to do with ourselves. We're our favorite people. So if you can rephrase what you read or come up with examples that deal directly with your life, you're more likely to remember it. The other one is imagery. And I think we talked a little bit about this too when I gave you the apple example. It's far, far easier to remember things if they have a visual image that goes with them or is associated with them. So a lot of times I'll have you draw images to try and help you come up with that imagery, that visual image that will go with the concept. The last thing I think we're going to talk about here is the shallow versus deep processing. So, and again, a set of confusing pairs here. So shallow processing is processing things at just the very basic level. So remember when I asked you how many F's were in that sentence. So that's shallow processing. Right? All you're doing is counting letters or counting syllables or counting words or looking at numbers maybe. Whereas deep processing, you're processing at much higher levels. For example, the meaning behind words. So anytime that we are processing something at a deeper level, we are way more likely to actually remember those things. Okay. I think that is it. Yep, that is where we're going to stop today. We will do storage and retrieval on the next video in a few days, but make sure that you complete your video guided notes and write down any questions that you have for me. Make sure you come into class tomorrow with questions so that I can help review any of these materials for you. I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.